Hello and welcome to Chess Lovers channel. My name is Thomas Engqvist and I am an international master from Sweden. Today I'm going to show you a game played by Anatoly Karpov, and on my left side here you can see two books showing his games, and I'm going to talk more in detail about the books in the end of this video. So first I'm going to show you a game, and it's actually the first game in this book, the complete games of world champion Anatoly Karpov. So obviously he was very young. The game I'm going to show you was played when Karpov was only 9 years old. 9 years and 8 months old, so he was close to 10 years old. And I am of the conviction that a very clever way to learn a really great player is to study that player from the beginning. I have done such studies of Capablanca, Fischer, and to a certain extent of Kasparov, because then we can trace the development of the chess player from beginning to end if the career has ended. And as we all know, Karpov became a world champion in 1975 by beating Robert James Bobby Fischer, who unfortunately declined to challenge Karpov after had been winning against Boris Spassky in Reykjavik 1972. However, Karpov has certainly proved his abilities by beating Viktor Korchnoi in 1978 as well as in 1981. And from 1984 and onwards, he was playing 5 World Championship matches against the mighty Garry Kasparov. But for now, we will focus on Anatoly Karpov as a child. How much did he understand of chess when he was close to 10 years old? If we study his game just by playing it through and note this concept, we are talking about chess on a human level now. I have not checked this game with a computer because I want to learn human chess and I want to learn concepts. What can you learn from Karpov that you can use in your own game? And I have come to a conclusion which I will reveal later in this clip. But first we will look at this game. And it was played in 1961, Chelyabinsk. Anatoly Karpov was black against Shusharin, an unknown player to me. And Shusharin opened the game with e4, and Karpov replied with e5. So we have an open game. And white continued with the most common continuation, the Royal Lopez. So what is putting heavy pressure now on the pawn on e5. So the pawn on e5 is the most important point in black's position, and we will see that Karpov really understood the importance of this fact. So Karpov played the Morphy defense a6, and white retired the bishop with bishop a4. And as you remember, when I discussed this book, The Modern Chess Instructor, written by Wilhelm Steinitz, Steinitz was critical of the fact that why should you set up a pin? Because the bishop is slightly more valuable than the knight. And here white is even withdrawing his bishop on the queen side. So it means he has lost contact with the king side. And such subtleties are very important to be aware of, because if you are learning such moves by heart, you still have to understand the pros and cons. So all openings has benefits as well as drawbacks. So here Karpov continued with knight f6, and here we expected white to play castle. But instead he played knight c3, so now we have a kind of 4 knights game. So obviously we understand that white is very focused on developing his pieces. But as we now know, this is not the most effective way of playing the Roy Lopez with the white pieces. Here black has to counter the tactical threat of exchanging the knight on c6 and take the pawn on e5. So this is the normal move, also securing space on the queen side in the process of chasing the bishop. So now the bishop is placed on a very useful diagonal, the classical diagonal a2 to g8, because the king is for the moment located on e8 and will most probably be located on g8 in the future. So the bishop is excellently placed on the classical diagonal. It is also very well anchored by the 2 pawns a2 and c2. In this position, Karpov also played a kind of Roy Lopez with the black pieces. So we have a double Roy Lopez, as stylists would call it. So we have an open game. We are expecting castling from both sides relatively rapidly. And here comes d3. So white plays with a closed center. He does not open up the position with d4. It's of no value here because black's king is already protected on g8. So we have a close game in front of us. And black stabilizes the pawn on e5. And here white played knight d5. In a famous game, knight e2 was played. It was a game between Schlechter and Tarrasch, Cologne 1911. But then Tarrasch replied knight a5, and here we can see the drawback, maneuvering the bishop to g3, because then white would lose his strong white square bishop. So knight d5 is understandable in that perspective, because now white tries to get the bishop to d5 and putting pressure on the long diagonal, however blocked by the pawn on e4. So in this position, Karpov exchange the knight and white recaptured with the bishop. In this position, Karpov defends the knight on c6 in a very clever way by playing queen e8. We might have expected that black would have put his bishop on b7 or d7 according to the mechanical development principle that says that you should develop your minor pieces before your major pieces. But queen e8 is a very clever move, because still white don't know where the bishop on c8 will go, and in the future the queen might be transferred to the king side after moving the king to h8 and then moving the f pawn. So this is a multi-purposed move which Karpov understood in this early age. Remember, he was only 9 years old and 8 months. So here white continued with a4, and this is a very clever way of developing the queenside rook without moving it. So here white actually benefits from black's early b5, which black essentially was forced to do due to the pressure on the e5 pawn. So black has to react to this. So Karpov played bishop b7. And in this position, white played b4, but we will look at d4, which would have put more pressure on the center. For example, if black plays knight d8 to try to relieve the pressure on the queen side, this would be a very bad choice, because then white could exchange on e5, exchange on b5, and then play b4. And as we can see here, white is going to win material, as the rook on a8 is not enough defended. So this would be an unfortunate choice by black. So instead, this never happened in the game, because he didn't play d4, which would have put more pressure on black's position. Instead he played b4, hunting down the bishop, which is now, however, placed on a more useful diagonal. So we can see that this is the wrong track to follow. And he played a5, and black could stabilize the bishop on a7. So it seems that white is happy just to be in control, because he's now blocking the position on the queen side. So here he's playing rook e1, which weakens the f2 pawn slightly. Now we come to the first position I want you to seriously study a couple of minutes, because the move Karpov played now is, to my mind, astonishing, considering his very young age of 9 years and 8 months old. So how would you continue with the black pieces in this position? I hope you paused and have also discovered the best move in this position. Remember, I did not check this game with a computer. I'm just trusting Karpov's intuition, even in his young age. I believe that many players would try to relieve the pin by playing knight d8 here. And of course, such a move is completely playable. Black will not probably be worse after that move. And also the knight on d8 might come to f4, which is a dream square in the future, by going to e6. But after knight d8, white would just take the bishop, and now the knight would be badly placed on b7. For example, the pawn on b4 prevents it from going here or putting pressure on the a5 pawn. So now black would lose a lot of time to maneuver the knight to the more flexible square e6. And the rook is standing here. We don't understand this position. It's not an harmonic position. If there was something Karpov understood on a deep level already when he was around 10 years of age, was it harmony. And the move he placed is multi-purposed, because he played rook b8. It's a grandmaster move, because his idea is not at all to move the knight on d8. Obviously he wants to relieve the pressure on the diagonal, let's say e4 to a8. It's a shorter diagonal now because of this e4 pawn. Instead of putting the knight on d8, Karpov plans to place the knight on e7. It can still go to f4 via g6. And it also puts pressure on the bishop. And an additional bonus is that if white takes on b7, the rook will come to b7, and in the future Karpov might plan such a setup, and now the rook is able to move, for example, to e7 or maybe f7 in the future. So here we see one very important wisdom we can learn from the young Karpov. He understood how to play with rooks, and this I already discovered in the first game of him. This is a very useful knowledge, because this means he was already thinking about the setup for all his pieces. He didn't play move by move. He has a scheme in his mind, an ideal, a dream he's trying to achieve regarding what are the ideal positions for his pieces. He understood this. That is astonishing, considering his young age. So he knows where the knight should be put. He knows where the rook should be placed. In this position, White saw that Black was planning to put his knight on e7, so he wants to play this move to be able to exchange the knight when it appears on e7. But Karpov did not mind, because he knew that the dark square bishop would be stronger than the kingside knight in this position. So here the exchange took place. In this position, White played an unfortunate blunder, because he played queen b3. I'm expecting you to see Black's best move here. Some of you will see it immediately. If you don't see it immediately, you pause the video and try to figure out how Black can win. Yeah, Black wins by trapping the bishop on d5. So apparently White was expecting an exchange to take place, but it didn't. So now White must act fast. I should tell you that even though Black is clearly winning now, I'm still going to show you Karpov's great ability of how to play with rooks will appear even when he's a piece up. So follow this video to its end. So White tries to put pressure now on the center. I mean, he's a piece down, so he has to act fast. Black took the bishop. So White has one pawn for the piece, and the kingside rook is now activated. And Karpov played here the very nice move f6, securing the stronghold in the center. In this position, White exchange, but this exchange is obviously in Black's favor, because the bishop is now pointing at f2 and the rook on f8 is pointing on the f. In this position, White played rook e2, so he's essentially overprotecting the weak point on f2, and Black played this security move of the king, and that is a good rule. When you have moved the f pawn, the king on g8 is best placed in the corner. And here, if we try to understand White's play here, he plays knight d4, and the idea is obviously to put the knight on e6, which can be regarded as a threat, which Karpov does not want to allow. So he made a pragmatic decision and just captured the knight. There is a good rule formulated by the American grandmaster Rubin Fine. He said that if you are material up, you should always exchange pieces rather than pawns. So that is what Karpov is doing here. And now he plays queen f7, putting pressure on the f2 pawn, so white cannot take twice on e5. He's also putting pressure on the d5 pawn. Obviously, Karpov wants to activate his bishop. And here Shusharin played queen g3. So he secures his king side while putting more pressure on e5. So black played bishop takes d5 and put the bishop in a centralized position. And now the e5 pawn fell here. Obviously black wants to exchange rook, so he played rook b e8. Notice how well he plays with the queenside knight. I am really impressed of how he deals with his queenside rook. So this is the next position. I want you to figure out, what do you think Karpov played? Or what would you have played here? I will promise you that you will be impressed by black's move. So have a thought and pause the video. I'm expecting you have paused the video for maximal learning benefits. I think many people would just exchange here according to Rubin Fine's principle. But Karpov found a much stronger move, which really impressed me when I played through the game for the first time. Rook e6. So he's not in any hurry to exchange pieces. He wants to improve his position by threatening to play the rook to g6. So he's exploiting his third rank, but from white's perspective we would call it the sixth rank, putting pressure on the g2 pawn. And notice that the hanging bishop does not hang, since the rook on e5 is essentially pinned. It will be mate on e1. And if white takes on e6, black will just take on e6. So a very important rule on higher level is that you should not follow the rule by Rubin Fine Slavically, because it's too mechanical. I have noticed that players on very high level, including Magnus Carlsen, in the game I saw when he played the Scandinavian defense against Caruana, I noticed that he wanted to exchange queens, but he doesn't force the exchange of queens. He let the opponent be forced to exchange queens. So an exchange of pieces should always benefit the player who wants to exchange. And in this position, black could have taken on e5, but this is a more multi-purposed move. Let white exchange on e6 due to the threat of rook g6. That is the idea, that you always think about activation rather than exchanging, because if your pieces are active, your opponent has to trade them down. So in this position, white did not want to exchange on e6 because it's on black terms. So instead he said, okay, you can play rook e6. I closed the f5 and I closed the long light diagonal. Of course Karpov played rook e6. I'm sure he had already seen that f3 was in black's interest. Yeah, and in this position we could have expected, according to Rubin Fine's principle, that black would have played queen takes f3, because then he will exchange queens in the process, because he wants to have an ending where he's a piece up, preferably that he has only the bishop on the board and all the major pieces are exchanged. But here Karpov still plays for an attack by taking with the bishop instead of the queen. Threatening rook takes g2, white must defend with g3. And here we can pause a little bit too. What do you think Karpov played? Yeah, Karpov continued to place wonderfully well with his queenside rook. So by playing rook f6, we can see he's already trying to mate white's king on f1 by maneuvering the bishop from f3 to g4 to h3. So already here he has this mating picture in his head. So white tries to disturb black's concentration of major pieces on f5 by entering the 7th rank. But black's queen just change its position by exploiting this diagonal, h7 to b1. So black has a light square strategy. White centralizes his queen, and here Karpov activates his queen by playing queen c2. So notice now the principle we can also see in Magnus Carlsen's game. By putting his queen on an active square, white is forced to exchange it. This is the key, how you should exchange pieces on the highest level, not by searching for trace. You activate your pieces and your opponent has to search exchanges. So now white has to play queen f2. Obviously black takes it because he has a discovered check here. Bishop g4. This is what he wants to do. Here we expected king g2. Obviously black would play rook f2 check. Instead white played this, and here the book says 1 to 0. So it means that black probably resigned here, or maybe he lost on time, but I think he resigned. There is no information that he lost on time. So what do you think Karpov would have played here? This is the last question in this game. Karpov would obviously have played bishop a3, threatening the deadly rook f1 mate. Rook takes f1, rook takes f1 mate. White's only defense would be rook e8. But then you could go here anyway, because after rook takes f1, obviously you cannot take here, but you take here instead. And now the rook is threatened by the bishop on h3, so white has to move it, but he has to move it on the last rank. For example, let's say rook c1, a black square strategy, as black has a light square bishop. Or maybe it would be more clever to play rook d1, because then you can always mate on d8 if black should be playing rook e4 here. So black would probably play king g8 here, put the rook on e2, and then just activating his king. So eventually the pawns on the queen side would fall. So it would be very easy win for black. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about this book, and I strongly recommend such a book of a specific super player. Now we are concentrating on Anatoly Karpov. And this book is called The Complete Games of World Champion Anatoly Karpov. And there is another book that was published before this one called The Games of Anatoly Karpov, but this is not complete games. So this is a selection of games. And as you can see here, this book has been written by Kevin G. O'Connell and Jimmy Adams. And this book is written by the same authors, but here also David Levy is mentioned. So behind this book we have this one, and you can have both books. We will concentrate on this one. I will show you a little bit how I have worked with this book. So, if you want to study a super player's development, you should start with his or her first games. And as you can see here, I have focused on the early years, 1961 to 1965. So he was only 10 years old in 1961. And here you can see what I have highlighted, and you can also see my notes, how I'm doing it when I'm studying a game. So what is highlighted in yellow is knowledge I never want to forget. And this is what I have shown you now. This is Swedish. Skickligt spelmetod. It means skillful played with rook. In this case, the queenside rook. And I have also noticed very skillful with the king. And this is really typical for Karpov. Maybe you remember the Caro-Kann game where he introduced a novel to King E7, double exclamation mark. So he was very skillful playing with the king, but we could see it very early. For example, here I have noticed that he played 26 King B7 in this game. You can see my annotations here. You should play through that game as well. And another game where he played 37 King E6. You can also see this here. And I mean, I have studied other games by Karpov. I have also noticed he's very skillful to play with the bishops. However, I didn't notice it especially with his first games, but in many games, for example in the white Roy Lopez, when he played against Ulf Andersson in the Junior World Championship 1969, a couple of years after this period of time, 1961 to 1965, he maneuvered his light square bishop to h5, and in another game against Unsecker, also a Roy Lopez, the Shigurin variation, he maneuvered his dark square bishop to a7, so he could be in control of the a file. So I have noticed that Karpov is very skillful with bishop because he's using the edges of the board. But I have also noticed that it seems that the knight is not his favorite piece, because if you study the game he played against Ulf Andersson in Milan 1975, where Karpov lost his first game as a world champion, even though he played on Ulf Andersson's clock. It's my conviction that knights has never been Karpov's strongest side, because he played so passively with knights. And I understood that all great players has some weaknesses regarding how they deal with their pieces. And the easiest way to discover this is how did they play with the pieces in their youngest age, because what you learn when you are young, it will follow you in the whole of your life. And this kind of learning you can do with all players, but my recommendation is that you concentrate on books and chessboards, and don't do this digitally, because then you play through the games too quickly. The main thing is to pause. To learn is to take time and understand and try to understand what is the most important knowledge in this or that game. So this is, to my mind, a big problem we have with the digitalization of chess in today's world. Because I'm convinced that the best way to learn is by reading a book coupled with a chessboard. Because you are learning by using your senses, physically speaking. That's what it's all about. It's not about speed. It's about concentrating on the most vital things. And we must understand what is the most important. It's not how many positions we learn. It's rather what positions we learn. Anyway, I hope I have given you a new method, which I have discovered myself, which is about following a great player's development from the beginning. Because by tracing the development of a specific player, you will learn step by step how the player is learning and introducing more and more advanced concepts. Because chess is not only about calculating variations, chess is above all about understanding, and also about understanding harmony. In this sense, chess is very similar to music, and we have many famous musicians who have been very skillful players in chess history. For example, Prokofiev was a very skillful chess player around 2200, I've heard. Anyway, that is what I wanted to message to you with today's video. So I hope you have enjoyed this clip, and see you in my next video. Bye bye for now, and thank you for watching.